Public education in Duval County is the topic today on This Week in Jacksonville. This man held talk with the soup. So what's the superintendent hearing? Plus, leaving behind, no child left behind. What's the impact in our area?
The reality is most of the principles of No Child Left Behind that were passed over a decade ago are firmly embedded in Florida's way of work.
Many more questions ahead for Dr. Nikolai Vitti on This Week in Jacksonville.
Thanks for joining us this morning. This is part of a series of conversations with local leaders, and indeed this morning Dr. Vitti joining us, Duval County Public Schools Superintendent. Wanted to talk with you, at least at this front end, about the big vision for 2016. What are the important issues coming in this new calendar year?
Well, important issues continue to focus on the transition to new standards and assessments. Luckily for us, we now are starting to see some initial results from last year's transition. So principals, teachers, even parents, students are taking a look at performance, how that compares to the year before, and then just making systems changes from an instructional point of view, intervention point of view, as we are in the middle of this year's work and at the end of the year performance. I think our big goals is continuing to offer more choice options for our parents. The school system and all school systems throughout the country, for the most part, have been designed to be a one-size-fits-all. Students come in, we do what we can with them, and then they move through
Works
the
for
K-12.
some, maybe
exactly.
not as well for others.
And I think what we've done a good job over the last 3 years is trying to make the schooling process more individualized, but also trying to create new programming to create individual programs, initiatives that speak to students at an individual level and parents to an individual level, so that we have more students staying in the public school system and even more parents and students coming back to the public school system. And so I would say that's really our work right now, but mainly from the in-the-weeds type of work is just still overcoming these challenges with the new standards and assessments.
I want to talk more about standards and assessments in a moment. One of the things that you're doing to try and get the conversation going, I guess, is chat with the soup. Held some town hall style meetings that we've been to this fall and now into the winter. Topics you said included so school programs, boundary updates, some other things like that, literacy, implementing STEM educational sorts of curriculum. Walk me through some of those, and what are you hearing from the people who come? Because I've heard some students there, there's parents there, there's teachers there too, right?
Right. They've been fascinating and helpful and insightful for me. Some leaders that I talk to in the city and even outside say they would never go into an environment like that, unscripted, no censorship of the questions, and it's really up to the participants to drive the conversation. So I don't give any kind of presentation up front, no PowerPoint, really even no handout. And I give them the floor. They ask any question they want, and I try to answer it directly. So I've learned a lot from our parents, particularly about challenges with the new curriculum, which is tied to that shift to the new standards and assessments. Overall, I think the impression is that they understand what we're trying to do with the new curriculum, but there's angst, there's frustration with the new way of teaching the standards, to what the standards are demanding. So I've gotten good feedback on how to make some tweaks and adjustments going into next year. Received some positive feedback on the expansion of art programs, music programs. I've heard some positive feedback on even some of the boundary change recommendations, but even with that positive feedback has been some I would call it sharp critiques with solutions. So no one ever wants to just hear the problem. They want to hear a solution tied to that. And some of the sessions have offered some solid recommendations to address some core issues linked to the rationale for the boundary changes. But as they critique, some solid recommendations on how to maybe modify or tweak the recommendation so that there's more support out in the field.
Yeah. Well, let's get into this just a little bit. Why change boundaries? Why make some changes there? How does it benefit the students, the teachers, the district?
Well, one of the things that I committed to when I became superintendent was to be an agent of change. When I was not interested in leaving Miami-Dade, was very happy there, seeing some great results. What came from Jacksonville was a request for a change agent, for someone who was really going to be transformational. And that spoke to me as far as why I wanted to come here and what I felt I could accomplish. I didn't want to go to a district that felt they were comfortable where they were and they wanted to keep things the same. So in coming to Jacksonville, I've taken on quite a few issues that either former administrators or superintendents haven't taken on, but they're pressing issues that aren't going away. One of those pressing issues is boundary changes, and linked to boundary changes are a couple of factors or challenges that aren't going away. One, enrollment. Over the years, our enrollment as an overall school district is declining or is flat. The other thing that is not changing is that in certain areas in the county, we're seeing a plateauing of residency rates or a decline in residency rates. So the number of school-age children that are supposed to attend boundary changes would not even house those schools at the right utilization rate. Many of those same neighborhoods are also dealing with low performance. And so you're seeing that as a district, we're going to have to deal with state sanctions with those same schools that are under-enrolled and low-performing. Coupled with that is the landscape of educational options are much more diverse and aggressive as far as choice as ever before. So as what I have seen in Jacksonville is leaders, politicians will have these very deep and adversary conversations about choice, non-choice, magnet schools, boundary schools. And as those conversations are taking place on the ground level, everyday parents aren't even listening to that conversation. And they're saying, I like my school, I don't like the school that I'm boundary to.
Pretty simple at that point.
And they're either going to other district schools, magnet schools, or even charter schools. So the boundary changes are really about dealing with those core issues of enrollment, utilization, performance, and even using our resources more efficiently, meaning we are spending a lot of money in a lot of these low-enrolled, low-performing schools, getting return on investment in some cases, but overall not. And I hate to talk about education from a financial point of view, but the reality is we're a $1.7 billion organization. We're about children. But I think you can talk about being economically efficient simultaneously talking about what's best for children.
Yeah, those two things have to come together in order to be effective, right? And
often it's hard to have that conversation because people talk about education only through the lens of children. And I think the lens should only be focused on children, but you can be economically efficient at the same point. And so the boundary changes are about redesigning certain schools from a programmatic point of view or boundary point of view in order to attract more students from those same neighborhoods to go to those schools or to attract parents from outside of those communities to go to those schools. And then lastly, it's about thinking differently academically. So many of the boundary changes are about a deeper focus on early learning. So a lot of elementary schools, we have literacy proficiency rates in the 20s or the 30s. And one of the reasons for that is that we're playing catch up with children starting in pre-K and kindergarten. So if we're able to solely focus more on early learning, so those children that are pre-K, even possibly three-year-olds, up to second grade and intensify interventions and resources, then by third grade, we're more likely to see children more ready, if you will, for that third grade test, and our resources will be better spent. So bottom line is we can't do what we've always done. Same result, same way of work is going to lead to the same results. And I never said that the boundary changes have to look as I define them. There's no ego in my recommendation.
You're still taking feedback on how this best comes together, right?
Exactly. So if it's not that, then what else? And I think that the community honestly has matured in recognizing that there are some deep-seated problems and challenges that the school system has not addressed. But these conversations, whether the chat with the soup or the working groups, it's leading to a recognition that there are problems that need to be solved. And I see slowly the community moving to being more solution-oriented rather than reactionary and defensive regarding those challenges.
Change brings defensiveness and it brings some resistance, and it takes some time. So stay with us as we continue. Crime and safety, a big topic for citizens across the area, right? We're digging deeper on some notable examples from the school district and talking about the concerns next on This Week in Jacksonville.
go up there.
Enjoy the freedom to go far, far away. Hurry in now and get most 2015 Jeep Cherokee vehicles for 0% APR for 75 months. Offer ends January 4th. See Star Wars. Get 0% financing for 75 months or $3,500 total cash allowance on the 2015 Jeep Cherokee Latitude.
This is Pastor R.J. Washington of the Titus Harvest Dome. Join us on Channel 4 every Sunday morning at 9:30 a.m. We're going to have a God time. Yes.
Need more valets.
Join the Dodge side. Get 0% APR for 75 months. Offer ends January 4th. Get 0% financing for 75 months or $3,500 total cash allowance on the 2015 Dodge Charger SXT.
When my 4 children were little, I worried about everything. When they began to drive a car, I held my breath until they came home. I'm Ultima Morgan of Morgan & Morgan. A car accident takes just a second to occur. Make sure your children buckle up. Don't use a cell phone while driving, and never text and drive. We have seen so much needless suffering that could have been avoided. Hug your kids every day. They are what is most important in life. Morgan & Morgan, for the people.
There's still time to get in. Now at Nissan's holiday event.
Get up to 1,000 bonus cash on top existing offers.
Get in before it's over.
Shop your local Nissan store and choose Nissan.com. Nissan, innovation that excites.
The Wolfson Children's Challenge celebrates the children treated at Wolfson Children's Hospital. This year's event will be held on January 30th at the baseball grounds of Jacksonville. Sign up a team for the 55K Ultra Relay, the 30-mile individual race, or register your kids for the 1-mile run. Find out more at wolfsonchildrenschallenge.org.
Crime alerts, scams, rip-offs. News 4 Jack's crime and safety analyst Gil Smith is here to help keep your family safe.
He's always looking out for you. Gil Smith has helped me protect my children.
A unique take on breaking news.
He's getting in, he's rolling up his sleeve, and he's already assessed the situation.
When crime hits close to home.
He puts me at ease. Gil Smith's got my back.
I would definitely say Gil has my back.
I'm News 4 Jack's crime and safety analyst Gil Smith, and I've got your back.
You're watching This Week in Jacksonville with Kent Justice.
The arrest of a Southside Estates elementary school student is causing a stir within the Duval County school system. Police arrested a 5th grader, Nikolai Harrison, for felony battery on a teacher. Harrison was held at a juvenile detention center even. Investigators saying that Harrison tried to take a piece of paper out of the teacher's hand by grabbing her wrists, and then he walked over to her, started bumping her with his stomach. The report said that the teacher had slight swelling and a bruise on her right hand. So Superintendent Dr. Vitti, that we're talking with this morning, has said that he doesn't agree with the decision to arrest the student, but the state attorney's office released a statement saying, contrary to the superintendent's statement, Florida law provides for a crime as serious as the striking of a teacher to be designated as a 3rd-degree felony. Dr. Vitti, I wanted to hear some of your response there. One of the things that you've advocated over the last couple of years is that, hey, not every child who gets involved in something improper needs to go through the court system. What do you think about this particular case, and maybe on a broader scale, handling those kind of complaints about children?
It's always a difficult conversation because I think sometimes when I message that we don't need the criminal justice system to deal with issues that have historically been dealt through the code of conduct in schools, many people hear that and feel that in some way we're lowering expectations as far as discipline and student behavior. And I think if anyone knows me as a father, as a former dean of discipline in New York City, or as a former principal, people will tell you that I have very high expectations for student behavior and children's behavior. But I also recognize as an educator and as a parent and as a child that made mistakes growing up. I think we can all attest to examples of making wrong decisions when we were young at varying degrees. But ultimately, in this particular case, I was against the arrest because of the age of the child and the circumstances regarding the issue. And I think the more when we're talking about children, we have to be individualized with the particular situation. Talked about that earlier regarding school choice and educational options. When we're talking about discipline, we have to look at every issue individually, not inject issues of politics, not interject issues of strong statements on crime, because ultimately when we lead and make decisions in that kind of manner, it's really children that are put under the bus. Because that individual child has a whole life in front of them. And ultimately, I asked the state attorney or anyone else that would be for the arrest of this child, if you just stop, de-emphasize the politics or neutralize the politics or ideology, I don't think anyone can answer the question that this child is better off short-term or long-term through an arrest or being put through the criminal justice system. Should there be consequences? Absolutely. Should there be consequences for the parents? Possibly. Should there be additional counseling for the parent and the child? Absolutely. Should the child maybe be transferred to another school, to another teacher? Absolutely. So there should be consequences, but there needs to be a deeper understanding and conversation and action based on the individual circumstances of the child and the age of the child. I think if you break that down, I don't think I think someone would be hard-pressed to really rationalize and justify an arrest in this particular case. I know the law. I don't know the law to the level of the state attorney, but I do know that the law, like anything, can be interpreted. And in this particular case, if this same issue or circumstance happened in Miami-Dade or Broward County or Tampa, or Pinellas County or Orange County in Orlando, I'm highly doubtful that the child would be arrested.
You think you go through that code of conduct and let the school district offer some discipline. You're not saying they get away with it.
It is completely unacceptable. And we're seeing that in battery cases. We're seeing where children are fighting. It should be completely unacceptable in the school environment. We've strengthened the code of conduct dealing with fights between two students. But in Jacksonville, two students fight. Highly or possible that could lead to an arrest, not a civil citation. Same fight occurs between two students in Miami-Dade, in Broward County, in West Palm Beach, other large districts in Florida, those same two children are not arrested. All about victim rights, all about higher expectations, but I think we have to think through the strategy to lead to those higher expectations. And arrest in and of itself in a one-size-fits-all approach is not work. And I think research shows that. We actually pay more as taxpayers for an arrest than a civil citation, for example, but the civil citation leads that child to be less likely to be arrested in the future and to go through the criminal justice system.
Let me change topics with you a little bit. President Obama recently signing the bipartisan rewrite of the No Child Left Behind law. They're leaving behind, no child left behind, called it Every Student Succeeds. So this new law is going to change the way teachers are evaluated, how the poorest performing schools are pushed to improve, give states, not the U.S. government, authority to decide how to use test results, etc. What are your thoughts on here, and how is this going to impact Duval County?
Well, for the most part, the federal government had moved away from No Child Left Behind for the past 4 to 5 years.
Almost by ignoring it.
Precisely. No one really wanted to touch the reauthorization issue, so everyone sort of left it alone. And as always, as we see here in Jacksonville, education can be highly political for some right reasons and for some negative reasons or outcomes or consequences. But ultimately, I don't think for the average parent, the average teacher or principal will see much of a difference with the change in law because most of the changes were already indirectly implemented by not reauthorizing it sooner and the flexibility provided to states. And I say not much has changed because although this new bill changes the direction from the original No Child Left Behind, the reality is at the state level, most of what was embedded in No Child Left Behind is already part of state law. So the average parent, teacher, principal, student won't see much of a difference because the state of Florida's state laws regarding education are consistent with the premises of No Child Left Behind. So linking teacher evaluations to test scores, sanctions for low-performing schools, a lot of that is already embedded in state law, so you're not going to see much of a difference, in Florida at least.
We've got about a minute left for this segment before we take a break. Let me talk about the FSA numbers. I know the Florida Standards Assessment, when they came out, showed numbers in Duval County basically in the bottom 25%. You were happy to tell us later about a different program that compared Duval County school districts with like districts, some 20 other districts, and then the results were a lot different. That's the National Assessment of Educational Progress.
Right, NAEP.
You felt pretty good about seeing that comparison, right?
Right. Well, I think by us participating in the National Assessment for Educational Progress, NAEP, for the first time, allowed us to take a better apples-to-apples look regarding how Duval County compares to other large urban school districts. I mean, we're anywhere from 16th to 20th as far as size, population, and that couples with diversity as well, socioeconomically. And so it's only natural to compare us to St. John's and Nassau and Clay, and we want to be competitive with those districts, but ultimately, on average, we don't educate the same type of child that those districts. And when you isolate our district for the neighborhoods that look like St. John's and Nassau and Clay, mainly our Beaches and Mandarin area, we're just as high performing as St. John's or Clay or Nassau, but the reality is we're larger and more diverse. And so when you compare us to those other districts, we do very well in reading and math in 4th grade and 8th grade. And our African-American students, our Hispanic students, our ESC students actually are highest performing compared to those large urban districts at the same time. So we are going to do better as compared to our neighboring counties. We're going to continue to raise student achievement, but I think it's important for perspective to realize that as a county, we're doing very well with all of our children, higher socioeconomic, lower socioeconomic, even by race and ethnicity, compared to other large urban school districts in the country. And I think citizens in Jacksonville need to take pride in that and recognize the work that we're doing, but also recognize that we're not stopping here. We're not celebrating. It's not time for a parade. There's much more to do, but to recognize that there is good work happening here with our children.
All right, good. So before we finish, I want to hear from Dr. Vitti about something called Instruments for Change. So stay with us on This Week in Jacksonville. We'll be right back.
When you've been injured in an accident, it's very important to call Harrell & Harrell early in the process. We will sit down and talk with you for free. Ultimately, our goal is to get you the justice that you deserve.
Harrell & Harrell. Don't settle for less than you deserve.
Make tomorrow awesome with Xfinity TV from Comcast. Right now, you can get Xfinity TV for just $19.99 a month for 12 months, with Xfinity On Demand included. Call 1-800-566-8080 today. Xfinity On Demand delivers thousands of hit shows, top movies, and more at no additional cost, so you can catch up on the latest episodes of TV's hottest shows anytime, anywhere. Switch to Xfinity TV for just $19.99 a month for 12 months with Xfinity On Demand included. Plus, ask how you can add HBO, Showtime, or Starz and enjoy award-winning TV shows and movies at home and on the go. There's no term contract and no early termination fee. Plus, it's all backed by our 30-day money-back Comcast customer guarantee, so it's risk-free. Tomorrow could be awesome if you call today. Call 1-800-566-8080. That's 1-800-566-8080. Xfinity, the future of awesome.
To winter with Infinity. Now through January 4th, lease the Infinity QX60 for $399 a month. Visit your local Infinity retailer.
Wow, you changed my old bedroom.
With a little help from a Haverty's designer.
He helped us reinvent the whole space.
And it is perfect.
I'm sure it was perfect then, too, because you're perfect.
Yeah, it was perfect.
No, Mom, you're grounded.
It's better now.
Well, my design sense is ever evolving, so.
It's all on sale for the holidays. Shop our winter event at Haverty's and enjoy 36-month no-interest financing. Haverty's, discover something new.
8:45 a.m. Southside. 550 athletes, 4 counties, 1 tough competition. Volunteering to help Special Olympic athletes have the time of their lives. That's why when Evelyn gets up, she turns on Channel 4. She can track fast-moving storms with the Weather Authority app, find trouble spots with time-saver traffic, and get breaking news from a team she considers family. On these fields, volunteers make special smiles happen. In Jacksonville, the morning show makes mornings happen. A crash took her son's life. A local mom finding hope from the ashes.
I was like, I got it. And the question of, where are you and are you okay? I got the answer.
What survived the accident that renewed her faith? Monday on News 4 Jax at 11.
Duval County Schools have been asking for a little bit of help. The district launched its first ever Instruments for Change drive, collecting used musical instruments for students. Schools teaming up with the Symphony, Public Education Fund, Duval County Libraries, and Florida Blue. As I asked about this, well, why are we doing this? Well, there's a list. There's been a waiting list. Hundreds of students who want to take music as an elective. There just weren't enough instruments to help the district meet its goal of exposing more students to the arts. So, Dr. Vitti, this impacts me. Music was very important to me, getting through school, getting to college, paying my way through college. So I love this idea. What's the response been that you've seen?
Positive. You know, when we look at, we've had an increase of almost $20 million into the budget for the arts. We have now a music and art teacher in every elementary school. We have a music and art program, music or art program, or both, in all of our middle schools now. And so as we've increased exposure, that demand has increased, and I think that's something to celebrate from the student level. And the more the community can help fill the gaps, the more we can meet the demands of children when it comes to the arts. And I think we all benefit from that, not only the children participating, but those same children. Research is clear that involvement in the arts leads to more active citizenship later on. And so it's a win-win for the school system, kids, and the entire community.
In just the last 30 seconds or so here, you guys recently had done a survey about school uniforms. Where do you go with that?
Well, this is actually part of these higher expectations, similar conversation we just talked about. We feel that uniforms are becoming more popular in our schools. We've had double the number of schools that have elected to move to uniforms. And so for us at the elementary and middle school level, it's about being more competitive with charter schools. It's about creating an environment that might be more focused on discipline, helping with identifying what kids are in that school and not. And so we're going to go to the parents and talk to them about the benefits and get their feedback.
And not to cut you off, but let me tell you about the next Chat with the Soup, where parents can get in there and talk with the superintendent. This Wednesday, January 6th at Celebration Church in the South Side, a morning meeting at 9:30. Dr. Vitti, thanks for being with us, and thanks for joining us on This Week in Jacksonville. We air each Sunday morning at this time. Thanks for joining us here on air and online at news4jax.com.
At News 4 Jax, we're always covering the news, even when we're not on TV. Stay informed, on the go, and online at news4jax.com.